Thanks very much. I hear applause, which I think that means it's my turn to start talking. So thank you very much for having me through Skype. I'm going to be announcing page numbers, so that's to help our hosts make sure that, that we're moving from page to page properly. So let's go with that. Now we're on slide 2. Here I am in San Francisco, and there you guys are. And just thank you to everyone for arranging this, to making it possible for me to speak to you over distance. It's a little bit of technical problems that had to get worked out, but I appreciate that. I am getting a little bit of feedback, and I'll see if I can fix that. I'm going to turn my volume down here. Okay, thanks everyone. Let's go on to slide 3. So I want to begin by talking about user research and what I'm calling a dichotomy. On slide 4, this is kind of the traditional split when people talk about doing research, and that's the, on the left hand we have this idea of doing generative research, where what we're going to do is study people to get some new ideas about what we could possibly do based on them. And then the opposite, or the contrasting approach, is that we show solutions to people to evaluate those solutions that we've already created, to see if those solutions are usable, but also if they're desirable or useful, really solve a problem. And so when you take that kind of split approach, you often are talking about just 2 methods. Ethnography, that's how we study people and come up with new ideas. And testing, that's how we evaluate if our solutions are good ones. In fact, there's many, I'm sorry, I'm on slide 6. I have to get in the habit of saying that. I'm on slide 6. There's a lot of different kinds of methods, and folks like Steve Mulder and Liz Sanders and many others have come up with these unified field theories, these complicated visualizations of all the different methods out there and when you use them and what they represent. And I don't mean to criticize these efforts at all. It's important to try to create structure around all this. But it takes a certain kind of mind to also trying to engage in all this complexity. So just as a point of contrast, on slide 7, here's how I think about it. That it's a continuum. And really, and I'll come back to this a few different times, I think, if we learn about people, we learn about their behaviors, their beliefs, their goals, that helps us understand something, opportunities to innovate. And I'm not saying what I mean by that. I might get close, but I'm not going to really define that. But we know what that means versus sort of fixing needs, fixing sort of things that we can point to and correct. Innovation is something much larger. But we also can see if what we're developing is on the right track. And it doesn't mean that we don't need to do these endpoints, that we don't need to evaluate an idea or a solution, or we don't need to generate new ideas. But the thing about contextual research, when we go and spend time with people, is you can almost always get some of everything. And so this binary approach doesn't work for me as much as thinking more holistically about if we're with people, we can learn from them in a deep way. So let's go on to 8. You know, and I'm definitely uncomfortable with the word testing, which is really a mindset that says, do you like this? I've come up with it, I'm going to show it to you, and you're going to tell me if you like it or not. And instead, you can do things like create provocations. They're not solutions. They are things that are intended to stimulate a discussion. So imagine we want to explore form factors in clamshell phones and navigation through tiny touch screens. And you know, this was a silly picture 2 years ago, and now you've seen those videos of people interacting with the iWatch. I feel like, oh, this actually is actually a interesting prototype that you could do. So the idea is, rather than talking about people's needs, we show them something to make the conversation tangible. And so the naive approach is to just take whatever artifacts we are already designing in our design process, and we just take those artifacts and they're our best guess at a solution, and we show them to people to see if we've got it right. And in fact, what I'm saying here is choosing what to prototype, choosing what things to create as representations specifically to do research, specifically to learn from people, have a different conversation by showing them something that in this case you would never make. So on to slide 9. This has been bothering me for a while when I hear designers talk about users. They talk about research as testing and getting feedback, and not that research anywhere on this continuum, not just on the very left-hand side, but that spending time with people, it helps you think about what the problem is. So here's a takeaway for everyone, that research is a way to think about the problem, not just to test what you're solving. And this isn't a methodological question, this is a mindset question. How you think about this in your own head gives you some different ways of looking at the world. So if you approach research activities thinking about that you're going to learn about the problem, not just the solution, then something different is going to happen for you when you spend time with people. On to slide 10, a new section will talk about design and many different aspects of what design can do. This is roughly in some order, but let's just go with it. Slide 11, design, and this is sort of the oldest framing of design that they've, as a field, design has tried to get away from. But design is about, at one level, making something look good. Now, I don't mean to say that this camera looks good. It may or it may not. It certainly looks like it was designed to have a certain visual and aesthetic impact. This is kind of what people call the shiny. So that's one thing that design can do. It's just the aesthetic appearance. Slide 12. Design can make things usable. So I don't know how common this is where everybody in the audience is from. These are sadly quite common parking signs in North America with a whole stack of rules, and you kind of need some mathematics to figure out which days, in which seasons, in which circumstance can I park here for how long. So this, even though the form factor on the very right makes you think, oh, this is an app, it's actually not an app. It's a project that's called To Park or Not to Park. And what this project is about is, as you can see in the middle, doing some analysis as to what actually is possible, and then creating these new information visualizations, and then just going and putting them out there in the world as kind of another layer of design to improve the usability of kind of the built environment. I'll say, just as an aside, there's projects and examples and things that I'm going to mention in here, and articles. Every one of them is going to be tweeted. I've set if you look at the hashtag for the conference, you'll see everything. It's not exactly synced up to when I talk about it, but over the course of my time slot, you should be able to go back and find these references. So if you don't catch what was that parking thing, you'll find it afterwards in the tweet stream. Slide 13. This is about taking information and changing our emotional experience with it. This is something that design can do. So this is a screen grab from the safety video for Air New Zealand, and they've done a whole series of videos for safety on when you get on board, but they're all tied in with Lord of the Rings. So it's a big promotion for New Zealand as the land of Tolkien. But in doing so, they're taking this information that we're all very familiar with and that we're tired of, and they've chosen a way to present it more enthusiastically and more engaging, and changed our relationship to it. So that's a design activity. On to slide 14. Taking an experience, so the previous example was making information, changing our emotional relationship. This is about taking an overall experience and changing our emotional relationship to it. It's not to say that these examples don't cross categories, but this is what I'm using this one for. This is a service called Blue Apron that they have in the United States, and a friend of mine just started a very similar service in Brazil, so the Brazilians in Sao Paulo can get access to something like this. It's a food delivery service. Every week you get all the ingredients and recipes to make 3 meals for 2 people on 3 nights. And we've been using this for about a year, and it's very simple, but it's remarkably transformative. We have to eat a meal for dinner every night. The decision making, the planning, the grocery shopping, all of that is eliminated, and it's fundamentally changed how my wife and I have dinner. And it's, in fact, escalated the quality of our cooking and helped us think about ourselves as good cooks, which we wouldn't have said otherwise. And so it's a very well designed and well thought through deliberate experience, and it's taken the ordinary and made it just quite fabulous. This is 15. So we're exploring what could something be. And so these are form studies. People with an industrial design education are very familiar with this. It's a standard design exercise. You take the idea, you're not changing the idea, you're just looking at representing it in many, many, many different ways, and you're trying to find what's the possibility space. So this is something design can do. How could this thing that we're thinking of be in the world? And that's in contrast to slide 16, which is where we explore what it could be. So this is brainstorming, this is ideation. We start with a design brief. We have a question. Often what I like to do is create a how might we question. How might we, and then the part that comes after that is the results you want to have happen. How might we help people that are driving know whether or not it's okay to park there? So we're not saying what we're going to do. We're just saying how might we enable something to happen. So you think very divergently, and you don't think about how you're going to implement it. We don't know that we are going to implement it. We just want to be creative and very broad. So we're exploring here what the solution could be, given that we understand the need or the objective. On to 17. This is a more abstract version, but design is definitely used for the creators, the producers, to further their conversation about who they are and what they mean to themselves and to the world. So corporate headquarters, architecture, workplace interior design, brand redesign, and all those are an interesting mix of changing what you say about yourself to the world as a way of changing how you think about yourself to yourself. So this is kind of about culture and about groups of people and about these large conceptual relationships between the entity of a brand or of an organization. Sometimes this is about taking the vision that the company has and making it real. And I saw a video recently from the ride-sharing company in the United States called Lyft. They have a whole story they tell about how what their service does is empower people who otherwise aren't served by transit to let them get access to in their underserved communities to transportation, so they can go to work, so they can take care of their families. The drivers who are otherwise can't get traditional jobs can work in these other kinds of environments and be self-employed. And generally, there's a sense of being empowered. And you might be very cynical, and I think that's appropriate to think, well, this is really about just persuading us that a company who wants our money is aligned with us philosophically, so we can feel okay about it. And maybe that's true. Maybe both things are true at the same time. This image here is from Apple's new headquarters. And Apple was, I think, historically had fairly ordinary-looking buildings, but their address was on a street called Infinity Loop. I mean, if there's not I can't think of a street name that's more aspirational to the power of magical technology than that. But the visual representation never really lived up to that. So, Apple is now designing this, and they're under construction. They're building this headquarters, which is extremely aspirational, extremely futuristic. And, we could sit here and tease apart, is this Apple telling a new story about itself? Or is it taking the story it's always been telling, since Steve returned or since the iPhone came out, whatever the eras of Apple are, and building a physical manifestation of that story? The overall process, and you can imagine the architects going through this in many meetings with the leaders of Apple, this critical activity of figuring out who we are and who have we been and what do we want to say about ourselves, why are we in business, what do we mean to the world. And so that, design here is creating the artifact, the building, but it's also facilitating that discourse to understand the situation, understand the problem, understand the opportunity, and then look at how to manifest that in the built environment or in brand elements or whatever the thing is that we're going to make. Let's move on to slide 18. And so this is, to me, this is the top, and it kind of pulls in all the other things that we've been talking about. I use the label innovate, and I've already used that word before. It's a kind of a scary word to say innovate because people will always debate with you, well, that's not innovation. So I'm not going to be super serious that what we're talking about here is innovation, but it seemed like the good word to throw down here. And so here's a much more complicated definition, but I want to sort of throw it out there and have it be something to keep thinking about and keep talking about. And this is the process of using design, and that's products, services, experiences, brand, other things, using design to connect. And we're going to connect who we are, we're the producers, our values, our passions, our talents, and we're going to connect us with what people are about. And that's not only their needs, but also their values, their beliefs, and their desires. And all those lists could be much, much longer. But think about, that what design is doing is connecting what we're about with what they're about. And so we need to understand all those things and then figure out how to make the connection between them across these many different kinds of design touch points, if you will, products, services, experiences, and brands. On to 19. And so Jess McMullen, who you're fortunate enough to have talked with you there, and I apologize, Jess, if you showed this. I don't think that you did, but this is something that he's been working on, and he's done a few different versions of it. This is my favorite. This idea of a maturity model, and you can look at organizations and cultures and see kind of where they are doing design. And as you move up, you're kind of addressing a bigger piece. What I just showed doesn't map literally to what Jess has been doing, but I think you can definitely see the parallels. I think this is a picture I just tweeted out, so you'll see it in the tweet stream eventually. On to 20. So let's talk about talking to users. I started off with there. I kind of took a side into design. We'll bring it all back, I think. So on to 21. So just think about research as spending time with people. And I talked about this dichotomy, and maybe it's a continuum between generative and evaluative. And as I said before, if you look at, let's say you look at what people are doing right now. I just want to, and sometimes we call that observation. We just learn about what people's current behavior is. If you ask the questions the right way, and if you listen the right way, that conversation also becomes what could be different for them, and what's stopping them from things being different. What are their hidden expectations? All these things are related. You get everything for doing anything. You get access to all this information if you do any kind of research where you're going out to people. And that really means you have to get out of your world and you have to get into their world. You have to spend time with them. And I think that phrase is really important. Leave your world, go to their world. That's conceptually, that's emotionally, that's physically, and I'll come back to that towards the end. And even if you don't think that what you're doing exploratory research, you have a very fixed question that you're trying to get information about, when you're with someone and you're asking questions and you're hearing what they're saying, you're going to get a lot more out of it if you have in your head an openness to hearing that. Let's go on to 22. That doesn't mean that what we do is we look to people to design solutions for us. The point of research is not to come up with the solution in the research. And this, I think, maybe connects with some of what Jeff was saying, that, the idea of questions versus answers. And I'm sorry, Jeff, I'm going off the tweets here, but research produces that. It produces questions. And the questions are about, what are we going to make? What are we going to design for them? It's up to us to make the decisions about what we're going to design. And what we use research for is to understand the possibilities. but we have to make that connection. That's the verb of design. And sure, there are methods like participatory design, and participatory design is about getting the discussion in the research activity to be about design. But it's you that makes the decision. So you might talk to somebody and they say, I want it to have a handle. That doesn't mean that what we do is put a handle into it. What we do is understand that having a handle is a proxy for I need to carry it. So we might say, oh, well, it could be light, it could be in the cloud, it could have grips, it could go on our back. There's all sorts of different ways to move it around besides having a handle. And you can sort of tell when you're in this territory, when or the dark version of this territory, when you see marketing press releases that say, they always, at least in North America, they always say, we listened to our customers and learned that what they wanted was X, so we gave them X. Anytime a feature is removed from an app or a new Coca-Cola beverage comes out, there's always some language around that. And it suggests that people say what they want and we just make it. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about making this connection, and that's a very creative and nuanced activity, not simply implementing. Let's go to 23. I'm hearing this all the time now, that that people that are doing research, that are out there talking to customers, it's changing how they're working with teams and how they're dealing with the design decisions that come up all the time. And so even if the research wasn't testing, let's say you have solution A and solution B, and you're trying to make a decision about what to spend time developing, you can go do research on solution A and solution B. But if you've spent time doing research, you spent time with customers, you build up, you accumulate kind of a body of knowledge about them and their lives, what happens is you already know a lot. And so when decisions come up, not everything requires research. It's based on what you've already learned from research. And that's changing the conversation about how people are working. I think this is really, really important. 24. Here's kind of this is for me in my practice, here's what I think is sort of the full, and you could go longer, but this is sort of the full resource planning and time planning map for doing research. Figuring out who you want to talk to, getting those people, figuring out what you're going to do with them, spending time in the field, going through the data deeply and pulling everything out of it. So that's 6 to 9 weeks easily, and I've seen that happen all the time. But a barrier for people is, well, we don't have time. So here's on the next page on 25, here's the trade-off. So think about how you'd go about it if you only spent a day doing this, if you'd only spent a day in the field, if you only spent 2 days doing field work. And each of these is possible, but just to be mindful of the trade-offs that you're making at each of these points. And you can scale each one of these up or down, but this is really what the process is, and so to be considerate of what those trade-offs are. On to 26, another barrier that people have is no one will let us do research. And I think if you frame it as getting permission, you're always going to lose. And really, if you believe in this and think that it's valuable, then your job is to figure out how can you go do it. And I think, I'll just leave it at that and go on to 27. Another barrier here is that you are not your users. And we know this is true. We hear it all the time in the user experience world. And yet, if you look at how people practice, they treat themselves as their users. They make decisions based on what they think they would do, or even worse, what they think someone else would do because they might be just like them. But, we take taxis, we buy music online, we share photos, we have food delivered. In a consumer context, it's easy to think about ourselves as the people, but we're different. We have a different relationship to technology. We have a different willingness to explore solutions. We have a different relationship to disposable income. We have different motivations. We're just different than other people because of who we are and what we do and our relationship to the thing. And this is bad. You are not your users. I'm scolding you and asking you to scold everyone else. People are complicated and they're interesting, and challenge your assumptions that you have, and you have an opportunity to just learn so much. And and work with the possibilities that are created from that. I'm going to move on to slide 28. People say they can't do research because they don't know how. But there are books that will help you do research. Here's one. I wrote it. Here's a discount code. You can get a digital version right away and save some money. You also can go to that URL, which has all sorts of artifacts for free that you can start to use. There are many books besides mine, but I'm particularly fond of this one. And I'm hearing from people that they're giving this book to somebody else, and it's letting them, without any kind of background, start to be much more successful doing research than they could before. So, there's lots of training out there. There's books, there's workshops, there's online courses. There's no shortage of access to information to help you get better at doing this. So, lack of skill or lack of confidence, which are, I think, related, should not be a barrier. You should be able to just, go forward and learn. And you're all people that are, investing your time at a conference that's about learning to do things better and inspiring you. So you are obviously very motivated. This is the right group to be thinking about this. Going to move on to the last section that I have here on slide 29. So slide 29 says it's about us. And so we've talked about design, we've talked about research. I want to talk a little bit about kind of who we are in the world and how we think about ourselves in relationship to these problems, both as individuals and both within our culture. On to 30. Yeah, so, as Jess looked at framing as the highest order of what design can do. And I think this is who we are individually. What skills do we have to do our work? But what is it like when we're all together, when we work inside our organization? That's our culture. And we need to look at both the individual and the collective to think about, this more advanced framing of design that I use, this connecting who we are to what people are with all these different touch points. So let's go on to 31. So I want to talk about this term presence, and the visual here is obscure for almost everybody, but it's from a Led Zeppelin record called Presence, and there's 3 people in the audience nodding. Hopefully Jeff is nodding. Please, I hope that this is a joke for you. Anyway, it's not a joke. It's just a visual reference, and a classic definition here of presence is being aware of and being connected to just the present moment and only the present moment. And this notion of presence is something that comes up in psychology. It comes up in yoga and meditation. So it's kind of in a lot of different places. And I've been trying to bring it back into design and think about ourselves individually as creatives who connect to the world. And on 32, maybe a complementary definition here, that presence can be about being aware of what's going on with you. What are you thinking and what are you feeling? And that if you have that awareness, that self-awareness, then you can make choices about how to act and what to do. On to 33 here. So building this self-awareness, think about it as a muscle. It's something that grows with time. I think I loved this. This whole article is good, and I've tweeted it. But I liked this quote here, that human nature is to experience something and then explain it. But if we can catch ourselves, being able to hear yourself and be aware of yourself before you have the default reactions. And I love how they put this. It's one of the greatest challenges of our lives. So they're not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy here. When you do this relentlessly and with discipline, and when you have moments of reflection, what comes out of that is mindfulness. And again, we're trying to connect what the world is like, not what we assume that it's like. And the pursuit of self-awareness is difficult and requires dedication. And I think, reminding ourselves that stuff is difficult is really key here. That it's great for someone to show a slide and say, self-awareness, presence, and we all go, yeah, that's great. It's hard. These things are hard and that as humans we're trained and built to handle things in a certain way, but that if we can dedicate ourselves to growing in this way, it changes who we are. And why I'm talking to you about it today is it changes how we look at what our opportunities are and how we sit among the rest of the world. On 34, Alan Cooper had this great tweet a while ago. To be a good UX designer, you have to get out of yourself. And just interesting sort of metaphor to think about, that this notion of being present, it is about getting out of yourself and sort of going outwards. But it's also about being very much in touch with inside yourself. And so I'm intrigued by the fact that the metaphors around this, if you think about kind of your eyes or the surface of your face as a plane, that the work we have to do here to sort of stay connected is not only to connect outwards with what's out there, but also connect inwards into ourselves. And the more that we can, they both work together, but they're both facing in opposite directions. And that, I think, I don't have a solution for that, but I think that's just an interesting framing to put on it. Let's go on to 35. And I'm just always fascinated with when the language of certain professions or certain disciplines starts to intersect and overlap. So there's something that gets talked about in meditation and in psychology, the 7 attitudes of mindfulness. And I've tweeted a link to this, so you can go back and read it in more detail here. But these are things like not judging, being patient, a beginner's mind. And I loved seeing this because that is something that designers and researchers and design thinkers, hopefully you've all, and maybe it's come up already in the last few days of presentations, this phrase beginner's mind. And that's letting go of what you think that you know. You start as if you are new and training yourself to do that. That's classic in the world of design, and here it is in the world of mindfulness. Trust yourself, even if mistakes happen. And these last 3, I think, are really interesting, and I won't worry too much on the nuances, because to me they're very similar. Not trying to make things different, just letting them be. Seeing how things are is acceptance, and letting go or not being attached is not holding on to what you want to have happen. And I think those are particularly interesting and challenging for our field. And so, of course, if we think about understanding the world so we can support it and improve it and add to it, then of course we have to accept it, and we don't hold on to what we think it should be. And so it makes sense in that context. But think about what we see in our field a lot, is that is the commitment and the passion that people bring. We want to change the world. We want to rock out. We want to make amazing stuff. We want to make something happen. And so that passion, that drive to make something happen, it seems almost in conflict with these mindfulness approaches that we just accept, and we don't try. We just are prepared to let go. And I don't know how to solve that for us either. I think these kinds of attitudes are presented as they're sort of ideals. I think about myself anyway as sort of looking towards these and understanding what they mean. But at different points in one's life, you have to choose: are you going to do that or not? So to be ambitious, I don't think is a bad thing. To want to be successful and be inspiring, those all are important, and we need that. But they sort of work against this. So I think if I had a recommendation here, it would just be to be mindful about mindfulness, to understand what letting go is, and to make choices for yourself about when you let go and when you actually are committed and are attached to something. But also here I want you to have kind of a framework or vocabulary for the nuances of what this really is about. So here's a practical example. This thing happens when we're interviewing people, is that once somebody starts to talk and they speak kind of in this paragraph, we start to think of all the other questions we're going to ask. And then this interviewer in the green here, they do a great thing. They just say, okay. They let the person keep going. And so even more questions come up. There's even more things that we want to start to ask based on what they're saying. Plus, we've got a whole bunch of questions that we've come with. So this can be kind of crazy making. You have a lot of things that you want to say. You can only say one at a time. And so here, very tactically, here's where this kind of mindfulness and self-awareness, because you can start to get anxious. So you need to, as much as you're listening to the person, you need to listen to yourself and say, well, what are the questions I want to ask next? And so I think what happens here is sometimes these things come up anyway. So if you practice letting go, those topics will return to you. And sometimes you can think about just prioritizing. What's the most important thing for our topic? The one that I recommend the most strongly is thinking about how we best listen, how we best connect with that other person. Just a quick story here. I was coaching some people on doing interviews, and I was watching them talk to people. And so we were talking about filing their taxes. So this person was describing a really lovely conversation. The interviewer was being very good and very connected and very polite and very nice, and they had a really lovely conversation. And this man says, so I get all the information together and I bring it to my accountant, and then I go and have a panic attack. And my interviewer said nothing. He said, what kind of file folder do you use to hold the documents in? And what happened was that participant gave him a little gift. It was kind of a test. He exposed himself and made himself vulnerable and said this important thing, a panic attack. Well, when someone gives you this big emotional sign, your job is to then follow up on that and say, well, why are you having a panic attack? That's what that man was asking for, and that's what my interviewer didn't know how to do. All right, moving on to 37. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but empathy is a topic we're hearing about a lot. It's being written about, more books. LinkedIn had an article a little while ago that looking at future job skills. In 2020, the link between all these different future jobs and what they're going to require was empathy. And I'll follow up with that on 38. And so empathy and mindfulness are related. And here's a great article that I tweeted out as well. It's about our biases. And so if you can observe in yourself your biases, which is where you judge people, you make a decision about who they are based on certain kinds of cues. If you can learn what those cues are for yourself, well, one way to do that is to slow down, be present, not react, but make the decisions. And so that's a way to kind of work around bias. And so getting over bias is a way that's connected to empathy. If we cannot judge, we can see who people really are and build our connection to them. And so when we're in circumstances that make us feel awkward and uncomfortable, and I'll tell you, talking to users is that. If you believe how people should be solving problems and who they are and what they should know, and you go out and find the opposite, that brings up all sorts of awkwardness and judgment and biases. So this is, what we're saying here is that that mindfulness, slowing down and being aware, developing this presence, makes you a better researcher, because it helps you see that the world is different than what you already think that it is. And of course you think it's a certain way. You've been building and designing and planning and strategizing based on your hypotheses, based on your strong, passionate beliefs. When the world turns out to be different, that makes us feel uncomfortable. And what this article is saying is that what we do when we're uncomfortable is we judge and we are biased. So rather than saying, oh, I'm surprised that the world is different, that's an opportunity, we say, oh, that person's wrong, that person's stupid. And of course, no one thinks that this is how we would talk to somebody, but this is really what happens. This is kind of the emotional reaction that we have. So this is, a way, just starting to link it all together. Let's go on to 39. And so this article talks about not being present means that you have trouble having empathy. And this quote was great. The more in touch with my own feelings and experience, The richer and the richer and more accurate my guesses are about what passes through somebody else's mind. Feeling what you feel is an ability that atrophies if you don't use it. So this is saying that here's how to not judge that person. Here's how to not think that a user that doesn't get it is stupid, is to pay attention to how you're feeling about yourself at all times. If you can hear what's going on in your own head, you develop that skill of not judging, of having empathy, and of making sense with somebody else. So again, it's that there's two things happening. We're looking into ourselves and hearing ourselves, and we're looking out at the world. And if you put them both together, they work in conjunction. It's not either or, it's yes and. Let's go on to slide 40. And I mentioned this before, but I think this is, really to encapsulate the challenge we have as individuals, that this, standing up and launching the new Apple product and saying, here's what we've got for you. This is sort of in Silicon Valley where I am, and I think in technology culture and lots of business culture, this is seen as the highest point. And so we're inspired by Steve Jobs and Tim Cook to a certain extent, and so we aspire to be like those people. And when we know what the solution is, we think we know what other people are about, and when we approach the world like that, we can't hear them. We design for what our vision is, not what the needs are. And so, think about trying to make this connection, not simply trying to, force our solutions on people. And so this means we don't talk in a way that is honest or authentic or human, that we say things like frictionless sharing, and we think that that's just like saying, what are we having for dinner? That's not how real people talk. And so, I think, being a know-it-all is different than being passionate and being committed. And I want everyone to think about the difference between, your passion and your presence, and to try to find a way to have both of them. So we've been talking about the individual. On 41, I want to talk about culture just very briefly here. And this is from a great article, which I've tweeted. To change culture, we need to do two things, and they both involve stories. Do something that makes other people tell stories about it. And the thing that you're doing is about what you want the culture to be like. Let other people tell stories. Or find people that are doing things that are worth telling stories about, that are about the culture you want to create, and tell stories about them. So you can change the stories that get told, and then that changes the culture. So here's an example. If your goal is about being faster moving and less perfectionist, then don't yell at someone who sends out an email with grammar errors in it. In fact, send out an email or a memo and put grammars in it. Do the thing that represents what you want to see the world that you're in like, what you want your culture to be. And those stories will propagate and become part of the discussion, and that sense of reframing who we are. On 42, this was put in a beautiful way by Mahatma Gandhi, who said, be the change. You be the change. Be the change that you want to see in the world. On to 43, just kind of wrapping up here. There's many things to take away here, but I've chosen one. This definition of design or of innovation, I don't even know what this is. Let's just call it design right now. But the idea that we're using all these different touch points, and there's many of them, to make a connection between who we are in a rich and nuanced way with what people are about, what their needs are, their values, their beliefs, and their desires. And with that, my thank you slide is 44. I'll stop talking now, and if we can do questions through Skype, that's great. I'm happy to do that.